Instagram Live. Are we live? Is this working? Is this thing on? Hey, it's 1 o'clock, and it's what? It's Tuesday, and we have a new week ahead of us. I stopped doing these lives on Mondays because I just need the extra day to get things done. I take a break from social media on the weekends, and so I didn't do one of these yesterday. I was kind of starting with these on Tuesdays now. So this is the first one of this week, and I'm excited because our guest today I met several years ago in person, but we've always been in touch on social media. He does a lot of similar work that I do, but also a lot more than I do. The guy's written books. He goes on tours. He does talks. Lots of great. David, I went ahead and sent the reply to your request. You should pop in here pretty soon. We'll get this ready. There he is.
Hey, Rick, how's it going?
It is going well, my friend. How are you?
I'm hanging in there.
Yeah, hanging in there. Well, let me just start off by saying it's good to see you again.
Definitely, yeah.
It's been a few years since we actually got to meet in person when you were visiting the San Diego Zoo, but we've stayed in touch online. But it's always good to actually have a conversation. So welcome.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's a great testament to the power of social media because we, like you said, we've, I think, only met in person once a few years ago, but, through the magic of all of these great social media channels, I feel like I know you. I count you among my friends. So
right.
It's pretty cool.
Yes, it is cool. It is cool. And speaking of the great, wonderful things that social media does for us in connecting with people, this is obviously a great example of a way we can connect. But before we jump into everything I want to talk about today, how about, just in case, for some odd reason, some of my followers that might be watching this don't know who you are or what you do. And by the way, if you're not following David, to start now, you can click over there now or after watching this. What exactly do you do, David?
So I'm sure there's many people out there that have no clue who I am, let alone be able to pronounce my name or try to search for it. But as you said, my name is David Mizejewski. I'm a naturalist with the National Wildlife Federation. If you're not familiar with the Federation, we're one of the oldest and largest wildlife conservation groups. We've been around since 1936. We focus mostly in North America. We do, all sorts of types of wildlife conservation work, from, working for strong legislation to working on species-specific campaigns. We publish Ranger Rick magazine and have for over 50 years. So we do a lot of work in the space of getting people connected to nature, kids in particular. Got a lot of great programs like our Garden for Wildlife program that I've been heavily involved with. Great American Campout is about to kick off. So, lots of stuff that's focused on protecting wildlife, wild places, and getting people connected to nature. So I have been with the National Wildlife Federation. I'm about to have my 20th anniversary.
Wow.
So next month, I'll have been there for 20 years. Yeah, it's kind of crazy to think about. But I joined because I had this passion for urban ecology and native plants. And when I was in high school in the 90s, I got really into this idea of, helping wildlife, not just off in, the great wild areas, but closer to home. The wildlife that can coexist with us right outside their door, our door, if we just give them habitat. And the light bulb moment for me as a kid growing up who loved wildlife was like making the connection between plants and wildlife, and the fact that plants are wildlife habitat. And so if you restore the right plant communities, each of us has this amazing opportunity to, sort of think globally, act locally, and restore habitat for wildlife. So I came to National Wildlife Federation in the year 2000 to basically run our national Garden for Wildlife program. Back then we called it Backyard Habitat. And I had worked at nature centers before. I have a degree in human and natural ecology from Emory University, which is a sort of multidisciplinary approach. So some science, some social science, that kind of thing. And my passion is communicating and getting other people excited about nature and wildlife and conservation. So that's how I ended up at the National Wildlife Federation, and I've been there ever since. And I won't bore you with all the gory details of how I spun off into media and became a television host and kind of media personality talking about wildlife conservation issues, but we can get into that later.
Fair enough. And I got to say, personally, I'm a huge fan of that, all the backyard, natural stuff and the books you put out too and all of that. And I really want people to get a kind of a big picture. It's like you have all the education background, you have all the experience background, but you're also putting out content on multiple planes, not just social media, but books are coming out, you're on TV talking about this stuff. And it all ties into what I always try to tell people. It's like, you can make a difference, whatever you might have, whether it's a patio with some native plants on it or a backyard or whatever you have. So I always appreciate your work and what you're putting out, man.
Yeah, well, it's never boring, and there's never a lack of stuff to talk about or content. Frankly, my biggest frustration is like the ability to actually create really good content and get it out there. I'm embarrassed to say that I've had a YouTube channel for like 5 or 8 years that I've not done anything with. And in fact, honestly, inspired by you, Rick, I spent all morning beginning to sort of really build that out, because I've got a ton of content, a ton of archival, video footage of things that I've done over the years. In fact, some of it's really funny because, again, I've been at NWF for 20 years. Mm-hmm. I didn't look like this 20 years ago. And so some of the old school videos that I did when I was first starting, it's pretty funny to see, just how people age. And so I'm going to put all of that stuff up on my YouTube channel, and I'm going to hopefully start doing some new stuff, some current stuff. And so just stay tuned. But yeah, I mean, if there's an opportunity to use any form of media, whether it's broadcast, the TV appearances, blogs, magazines, books, podcasts, video, Instagram lives, I want to do it. My passion, again, is just sharing all of my excitement and passion about conservation with everybody out there. And, this message that there's a lot of bad news, right? I'm not going to sugarcoat that. We're in a wildlife crisis. We're in an extinction crisis. It seems like every other day there's more bad news, but, we can't let that make us kind of pack up and go home. And, we're probably not going to win all these fights. There are going to be a lot of species that go extinct and habitats that get degraded, and the climate, is pretty messed up. And I'm not sure that we're really going to get the political will to pull it together to change that. But yet, there's still so much worth fighting for and worth saving. Exactly. And so, again, if I can use social media and other media channels to just inspire other people to get involved and maybe learn a little bit about wildlife while they're going, that's what I want to do.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And that's great. And I'm glad to hear you're firing up that YouTube channel. When you have old content sitting around, it's some of the best YouTube content, because really you just got to, trim it up a little bit with some editing and throw it on there, and you're good to go and save the time from filming. So
yeah.
I look forward to seeing your YouTube channel come back alive again. This will be good. This will be good. So going into all that, this is sort of background for anyone who's watching this, not in the sequence of all the other ones I've done. I started doing this a week of Endangered Species Day back in May, because I myself and you and others that do what we do, we have our spiels, we know our talking points, we can get them out there, and it's all good stuff. But we're going to keep doing that because it's important, like you said, and we have to fight for that. But I also thought it's kind of fun that when we tell personal stories, sometimes to family or friends, about our adventures or what we do, it makes it more personable. Maybe the general audience would appreciate those too, because they can relate to the person telling the story instead of being talked to. So I came up with this idea to talk about our most unique or unusual or memorable animal encounters. And before we get into that with you, though, one thing I do want to touch on quick, because we are still all dealing with this, although things are changing a little bit more. How has the pandemic impacted your work, or has it at all? Have you been able to work from home successfully with all you do, or what's it been like for you? Because everyone's kind of dealing with it in their own way.
Yeah. Well, wow, that's a big question. I mean, I, like many people, it's been super stressful. Yeah. Just the anxiety alone, and all of that. Layered on top of that, I just by coincidence happened to be moving right when things were kicking off.
I saw you post about that, yes.
Yeah, so I've relocated up to the New York City area from the Washington, D.C. area. And this was in the works for a while, and it just so happened. Like, I literally closed on my D.C. house on March 13th, which was the day that really everything started hitting the fan, right? Yeah. And then I had to live with my mom and dad for 6 weeks while we were waiting to close on my new house. That was fun. Love you, Mom and Dad. But I think we were all ready for that 6 weeks to be over. So, it's been stressful. For me, though the National Wildlife Federation is based in the DC area in Virginia, I have spent the better part, again, of the last 15 years, commuting to New York and Los Angeles for TV appearances and traveling all around the country for speaking engagements and partner stuff. So that aspect, the sort of not being able to go into the office, hasn't really impacted me that much. I mean, I obviously miss seeing my coworkers face to face, and we haven't been able to do that. But on the plus side, if you can say that there's a plus to all of this, I've been burning the candle at both ends for, again, the better part of 15 years. And so the fact that I am not going to the airport every week like I normally do has actually been a little bit of a blessing, especially, you know, just moving into a new house and wanting to nest a little bit and get everything set up. So, you know, looking on the bright side of things, there is that. And, but yeah, overall, it's been as stressful as it is for most people out there. It's tough times.
Understandable. Excuse me. Understandable. Yeah, I get what you mean. Where it's like, you know, you can look for that silver lining. I know. For me, I'm not. You know, my silver lining is I'm not driving back and forth to the zoo and safari park all day long every day. So I'm using less fuel, so less pollution that way. I mean, I do have a hybrid, but still, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, this is different. It's stressful. There's you know, got to change stuff, but there's some silver linings too. So yeah, I'm glad you're able to pull that perspective.
And you know, on that note too, and this is something we're talking a lot about at the National Wildlife Federation, is, you know, do we need to be traveling the way that we were before?
Right.
You know, we're doing this, right? Do I actually need to fly to Los Angeles if I have an LA-based appearance? I mean, maybe there's opportunities, because I hate flying. I'm a terrible flyer. I have all the like crazy psychological anxiety, even though I know it's totally safe. Yeah. So, you know, if I can be doing remote appearances more, then not only can I spend more time at home and all of the benefit that comes with that, you know, the recuperation and all of that, but I'll have a much smaller carbon footprint, because that's the one big downside of being constantly on the go and traveling that I think about often is, you know, my carbon footprint's pretty high just to do my job. Right. So yeah, silver linings, you know, for what they're worth.
Yeah, no, it's good. Yeah, it's good to have that perspective. And I know for some people, it's very hard to find the silver lining, but you know, hopefully we all can kind of get through this and get to the other side a little better off and a little better perspective on things and how to operate. So
right, and I do want to acknowledge that you know, in the grand scheme of things, I'm fine. My family's fine. You know, we haven't been touched directly in the way that many other people have been hit hard by the COVID-19 crisis. And so I always want to acknowledge that that good fortune, that privilege that has allowed me to stay, you know, safe and that kind of thing. So not everybody has it that easy.
Yes, and glad to hear that your family is all safe and healthy. That's for sure. But switching gears now, I'm going to ask you the key question of why we're here. In all your years of doing everything you do, TV appearances or just even out in nature in general or on a hike, whatever it may be, what has been your most memorable animal encounter?
Well, this is a tough question. Because I have so many different encounters and stories that I thought could fit the bill for this. I'm going to have probably a fairly boring answer, but it's the real answer. And so probably my most memorable and impactful wildlife encounter was the very first frog that I caught as a kid.
Oh, right on.
So, you know, I grew up in suburban New Jersey and, you know, had the good fortune to get to run around outside and play and explore nature. You know, my neighborhood was surrounded by woods, there were fields, you know, there was a stream, and that's what I did growing up. You know, after school, on summer vacations or whatever, I would run around in the woods with my friends, climbing trees, you know, getting covered in mud, completely covered in poison ivy at least once a year until I learned how to identify it. But, you know, that experience was so foundational because, you know, again, just getting to traipse around in the creek and see a green frog, you know, which I call like my first frog, right? It's the first species wild animal that I probably was able to just identify on my own. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I know it's that double-edged sword of, you know, we don't want people to go out and catch wildlife out of the wild, but of course so many of us did. And it did help us get a real solid connection to nature, but also, you know, kind of sow those seeds of science, of discovery. You know, as a result of that, you know, it prompted me to learn species identification. You know, and that's a journey that I'm still on, right? And learning the differences between a bullfrog and a green frog, both in the field, but also to be able to kind of communicate about it. So, you know, like I said, seem a little mundane and trite, but it really, going back to the thing that is probably, again, the most foundational,
Right.
that to me trumps some of the other stories that, if we have time, I'll share, about how I almost killed Conan O'Brien with a water buffalo once, and, getting attacked by a cockatoo named Peaches, which is the worst animal encounter that I've ever had. But yeah, I mean, that's if I'm answering that question honestly and from the heart, that's what it would be.
And I love that. You opened with it may not be a very exciting or good story, but that's not what I'm wanting from these. I want those kind of stories, and that's perfect because it encapsulates so much of what our messaging is normally about anyways, but it brings it home because that was your experience. You got to be outside, and at an early age, it was so impactful for you to catch and identify that frog. And now look what you're doing. And look where you are. I mean,
Yeah.
that thread from that moment of catching that frog to now, and everything you've done for wildlife. And part of what we always say is, get outside, and look around, enjoy your, whatever it may be, a park or a natural habitat, or just sitting, watching the birds fly by, whatever it may be. Your frog encounter encapsulates all of that so perfectly. So I appreciate that. I think that's, I think for a lot of us, it's that moment in your childhood wonder that you're like just so awestruck that he leads you down this path. And I think it's great.
And that's exactly what happened. I mean, again, I feel like, people always say, how did you get into all of this nature and wildlife stuff? And I tell them, both tongue in cheek and honestly, that I was born this way, and I think a lot of us that have these careers somehow in those worlds of science and nature and wildlife probably can relate to that, because it is this sort of innate draw. But without question, if my parents, both of whom, by the way, were city kids, they had no connection to nature growing up, and just I guess intuitively knew that it was sort of a good thing and encouraged my sisters and me to again run around outside and play and discover. From without that, it's kind of like the seed was there, but that those experiences were that kind of like nurturing soil that allowed it really to take root. And I went on to become a junior naturalist at my local nature center when I was probably under 10 years old, and I did that for a few years. And when I was in high school, I did outings with our wilderness club, and then again in high school is when I kind of got turned on to the idea of native plants, and made my parents rip out their entire landscaping and put in a lot of native plants, and kind of self-discovery. It was kind of the same thing. It's this thread that went all the way through up until the point of graduating and getting my first job out of college was at the Chattahoochee Nature Center outside of Atlanta. I don't know if you've ever visited or been there, but still.
I've heard the name. I've only been to Atlanta once, and it was for a tour we were doing with Children's Hospital stuff, so I didn't get a chance to see anything other than what we were scheduled to see. So.
Well, if you ever get back there, it's a great ecosystems, upland ecosystems. And I have this degree in human and natural ecology, but I also have a degree in political science. Oh, okay. And so I kind of paired those things, thinking that I would go on and kind of maybe do a little bit more of a traditional conservation career path. And that was get involved with advocacy and policy. It's one of the, how I ended up here in DC, or where I used to live in DC. Right. Still hasn't registered yet, but I don't live there anymore.
Still
but, I moved, or there's so much conservation work that happens in DC because a lot of it is policy oriented. And that's a really critical piece of the conservation movement. But what I realized by the time I was getting done with my, my undergrad in political science with this ecology tag on was that I actually am not good at it. I don't have the aggression and the just that tenacity to be embroiled in what are these really tough fights all the time. Mm-hmm. And of course that was disappointing because I was like, well, just wasted a whole bunch of my parents' money getting these degrees that I don't know what to do with. So for lack of something better to do, I was looking for something short-term to just get me through, and I found this summer camp naturalist position available at the Chattahoochee Nature Center, and I applied and I got it. And what I got to do that summer was take packs of 7 and 8-year-old kids out in 2-week sessions and run around in the woods with them and help recreate those experiences that I had, learning about nature. And that's where I got my first training on how to handle wildlife. There's a wildlife hospital on site at the Chattahoochee Nature Center. So they, of course, have a fairly, robust teaching collection of animal ambassadors,
Right.
you know, non-releasable animals and things like that. And so that's where I got my first training on how, you know, first professional training on how to actually safely and appropriately handle wild animals for education programs. And of course, I do a lot of that work today, like you, in the media, going on TV shows and sharing animal ambassadors with the goal, of course, of, you know, just trying to get people to have an emotional connection with these animals and want to protect you know, their cousins in their wild natural habitat and inspire people to just care about, you know, conservation. But it all started with that, as a kid, being able to go out and explore nature on my own. And, you know, again, as I mentioned earlier, that's a big part of what the National Wildlife Federation's mission is all about. So, like, I'm just so lucky. Like, I get to do what I love.
I know,
get
right?
to do it at an amazing organization that is just so aligned with, like, everything that I'm passionate about. So, like I said, I'm very lucky and blessed.
Yeah. Yeah. I know exactly what you're saying, man. Truly do. And I love hearing those stories where, you know, like I said, all the way from the frog to now, and you're going back one step further than, you know, you jokingly, but have seriously saying I was born this way. That's a much quicker way to get to it, because what I usually say is, like, I compare it to, I don't know when I decided to take my first breath, but I breathe. And so for me, it's like, I didn't have a pivotal moment that's like, I'm, oh, wow, I'm so interested in animals, or I love animals. It's just always been a part of who I am. So I love that. I'm going to steal that if you don't mind.
No, absolutely. Yeah. No, look, we all, you know, this is all for everyone, you know, take it and run with it. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm going to deviate from what I would ask next just a little bit, because we do so much stuff that is similar now. And you, like me, started off not being in TV and media and that sort of stuff, just doing the job. And it's funny that, you know, I didn't realize that you're coming up on your 20-year anniversary. I'm coming up on my 20-year anniversary too. So it's funny that we both started the same year too. I'm going to deviate because I get this question a lot. What was it? What was your first national television show, and were you nervous?
Oh, great question. So my very first national TV appearance was believe it or not, the Today Show. Weekend Today Show,
right?
With Hoda Kotb was then the weekend anchor, and the very first edition of my book, I've got a how-to book, very consumer-friendly kind of book. So in other words, not a science textbook, called Attracting Birds, Butterflies, and Other Backyard Wildlife. And this is all about the National Wildlife Federation's Garden for Wildlife program. So it's the average person out there, what can I do in my own yard or garden space to make it better for the birds, the butterflies, and all the other cool wildlife? So somehow I got booked on the Today Show to do a segment. And I know you've done the Today Show a whole bunch as well. Yeah. And so it was kind of mind-blowing, because we did this huge setup, 3 different gardens filled with native plants right in the plaza. The kind of segment that I don't know that they do so much anymore. But anyway, Hoda and I did this segment. I had a copy of it on VHS, and it somehow, you know, at this stage of the game, the tape, you know, and so I think it's lost, because I was looking for it for that YouTube channel. But at any rate, yeah, so I did that. It was pretty amazing. And I'll tell you what, the thing that people don't believe about me when I tell them this is that I'm actually naturally an introvert. And so I am not the kind of person that enjoys being in the spotlight, or, you know, kind of being put on the spot and that kind of thing. Like I said, I would much rather during these times be at home nesting and doing my thing. But when it's about, when I'm asked to, you know, speak or get in front of the camera about something that I care about and something that I know a lot about, then, you know, it's the opposite. Then I go into this sort of extrovert mode, as everybody watching is probably like, oh my God, chill out. But so I don't typically get nervous before I do my television appearances, even back then, because I'm like chomping at the bit. I'm like ready to go. And I'm like, I want to talk about this stuff. Like, I want to share what I know and help other people get excited about it. And so, yeah, I'm trying to think if there's ever been an example of where I kind of got nervous. There is one. It's not a TV related one necessarily, but when the book came out in 2004, and this is how I got launched into doing television, Animal Planet got my book and developed it into a TV series called Backyard Habitat. So I went from just, again, kind of being, you know, a nature geek, working at a nonprofit conservation group, a naturalist, And suddenly I was standing in front of the TV camera hosting TV shows because I got cast to be, one of the hosts of the show.
Right.
And that was in 2005. And that's what kind of launched me into doing everything else that I've done since. So for those that are not familiar, there are these big events that happen every year called the upfronts. And these are basically where TV networks get to sort of roll out their new TV shows that they really want advertisers to kind of invest in. So it's a big kind of, gala event and song and dance and a lot of hoopla. So Backyard Habitat got picked to be one of these, these feature shows in 2005. And so I get, I'm up in New York. I have my, the Animal Planet talent manager there with me, kind of shepherd me around. I'm like a deer in the headlights, like all of this is new to me. I have no clue what's going on.
What am I doing?
Right. So they, they get me backstage and, they stick me in the green room and they're running around. It's like, like a bee's nest that's been hit with a stick because, just event planning. Right. And so I'm standing there and I'm by myself. I'm like, eating a peanut and drinking on a seltzer. And I hear somebody walk in the room behind me and I turn around and it's Jane Goodall.
Oh my God.
And exactly.
Oh
and
my
so,
gosh.
who doesn't grow up idolizing Jane Goodall when you're in this field and beyond, right? And, rarely am I speechless. I turned around and I was like utterly speechless. I just like my mouth open and I probably made some weird grunting noises. And she looked at me in her very kind Jane way, like, she just let me have my moment of like being starstruck. And then of course I said something like completely ridiculous, like, I think you're amazing or something. And like just kind of like had a little meltdown. And she just like smiled and said thank you, and I like fled the room. So
right.
That's probably the only time that I've ever been nervous in a kind of a professional sense. But yeah, I guess I'm blessed in that way. But just again, like if that doesn't make sense to people or they don't believe me, if you ask me to talk about something that I don't know a lot about or I'm not passionate about, I don't know, sports, I'll be the first person to just stammer and just not have anything intelligent to say. My nerves will get up and my face will go red and all that. But, if you ask me about nature and animals and wildlife and plants, I'm pretty comfortable with all those. So
Good. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I know it's a little bit off of what the normal topics are, but I was just curious. So, with the parallels, I wonder. So, and it's a question I get too. So I wanted to.
Yeah, well, I'm actually curious about you. What about you? And there's no shame in being nervous.
Well, it was, so I had, as a keeper here in San Diego, I worked in our children's zoo area. So I worked with all these ambassador animals that would come out for events. And then our daily routine, aside from the keeper work, was to go out on grounds and engage the public with sort of these informal chats and walkarounds. And so I like you, it's like, you want me to talk about what I love and I'm passionate about? Sure. Do you mind if I go over time? Because I'm going to talk a lot. And then so with that, I started getting used for a lot of our local media. We would do in studios with some of our local channels, or they would come on grounds and we'd do stuff. So I kind of, if you, for lack of a better term, cut my teeth doing a lot of local media. And because I would do it so much, I would volunteer to do it. I'm like, yeah, I'll go talk about that. Another staff member was like, no, I don't want to do that. So I ended up doing it quite a bit, and I kind of became acquainted with, and I wouldn't say friends, but acquainted with a lot of our local talent. So I was very comfortable just chit-chatting and all of that. And so my very first national appearance was 2010, I believe it was, and it was the old version of the CBS morning show.
Yep.
And so I really wanted to make sure I knew what I was doing, and it's not a show I normally watch. So I spent probably 2 weeks leading up to it, watching the show every day, seeing who are the main players, how do they transition, who tends to be the serious one, who tends to be the joking one, because every morning show has that. And I didn't know who I was going to be paired with. So I did a lot of homework on it, really getting to understand it. And I'd never been inside of a New York studio before. And here in California, studios are big. They're based on the bigger shows, I think. And so you just have an ample room for everything. So I was surprised. We went to the CBS network's studio for the morning show, which is a different location than where it is now. So tiny, though, super small.
Welcome to Manhattan.
Right, exactly. We mashed in there. It was all business. It was like, because I'm also the supervisor of the team when we're doing this. So I have a responsibility to the team, not just a responsibility to being on TV. So my focus really is in the animal care side of it and the safety side of it, making sure we're following all our proper protocols. all of that stuff. So it's a very, very, I don't have time to think about being nervous or what I'm about to do. And then
100%, by the way, I'm
right.
right there with you. Like business mode, I'm worried about all of those same things, like animal safety and comfort first,
Yep.
safety of the people around. We want to do this, the right way. And you don't really have time. It's such bedlam. You know how it is. It's like
Oh
a
no, it is.
million things happening at once.
You
Yeah.
get shuffled into an area that's a different area than where you're going to be, and then they wait till just your segment's about to start, and you're shuffled up to the studio, and then you're waiting on the sidelines, and then once that desk area is clear, you can get in there and set up while they're doing weather or something, and they bounce back to you. And it was in that moment, it was right in that moment where we had just been getting everything set up and like, okay, I'm in position, I've got my team is with me, I've got the animals where they need to be, and we're just waiting now for them to finish weather. And then they're going to go to a 2-minute break and they come to us. And in that moment where I was like, everything is done that needs to be done, and now we're just waiting, I started kind of looking around, and all of a sudden I was just like, I started overthinking it. I was like, I know that all these important people in my organization are watching. It's our first time back on national television since Joan Embry in 2002, I think. So all of a sudden the mind went too far, and I could just feel like I just felt going pale. I got cold and pale. And I was just like, what? Nope, just having a conversation with your local media friends. It's no big deal. And I was able to pull out of it. But for a brief moment there, I almost went down that path. And I'm so glad I was able to kind of, psych myself back. But for a brief moment, I had a little bit of a freak out.
Yeah, no. And it totally makes sense, right? And, but a couple of things that you said I want to call out because they're really important. And, in the spirit of paying it forward, I'm hoping that there's lots of people out there who are watching who might want to do the kinds of work that we do, whether or not it's on TV or it's at their local, nature center or zoo or whatever, or some other opportunity to just get up in front of people and talk about this stuff. When I first started, I reached out to one of my friends, Julie Scardina, who was at SeaWorld for many years, serving in a very similar role to you and me, kind of as their public face and ambassador. And Julie was on the board of a training opportunity that I was fortunate to go through called the Emerging Wildlife Conservation Leaders Initiative. I'm now on the board as well. Cool. But at any rate, one of the goals of that initiative is to take young conservationists and help them build a network and get access to, more seasoned professionals. So one of the first things that I had this great opportunity to do from the connection there was get some time with Julie. And I remember asking her, you've been doing these TV appearances. Julie did Jay Leno for many, many years. And
maybe that I've heard this and I haven't been able to verify it, but I was told that she was the most, she holds the record on Jay Leno for the most reoccurring appearances from any other guest on that show.
I think that's true. I think I've heard that as well.
Yeah, I've heard that multiple times, so I'm pretty sure it's true, but I don't have any actual data to back that up.
Right. I'll reach out to Julie and ask her, and we'll verify that. But you know what? I asked Julie, just for advice. What do you, I'm getting thrown into all of this. I've frankly no idea what I'm doing. Can you help me? And the one major thing that sticks with me is that she said, well, be prepared. Mm-hmm. So like you were saying, doing that research, watching the show, trying to get a feel for the personalities that you might be interacting with, it's so important. And then obviously boning up on all of your natural history facts and conservation facts about animals. I'm a generalist, right? So I'm not, I'm not an ornithologist. I'm not an ichthyologist. I'm not a botanist. I have this kind of broad-based knowledge, a lot of which is book learning and classwork, but a lot of it is, just sort of self-learning and being able to be surrounded by some amazing mentors in my career that you just sort of sponge in information from. But, even if it's a species that I'm super familiar with, before I do any media appearance, I always sit down and I go through and I get my thoughts together. I do my research on the species. I, try to find out, make sure I have embedded into my brain, its conservation status and its range and its weight and size and all of that. Just because inevitably that's what they ask, the TV hosts. Oh, yeah. I also try to learn the individual animal's name and know its sex because that's what people want to know too. But at any rate, I just hearing you echo that same thing, that it's really important if you want to do this work, and be professional at it is you got to do your legwork. You got to do your research. And my pro tip there is don't, like you said, overthink it.
Yeah.
So you can rehearse, but I think it's better to verbally say the things that you want to say in a kind of a no pressure scenario beforehand. And again, you might call that rehearsing. But my goal always is to embed the facts that I want to communicate and the messaging and the talking point into my brain
Yeah.
to the point where I don't even have to think. I like the cameras go on and I'm gabbing with Wendy Williams or Conan O'Brien or the Martha Stewart show that I used to do all the time. And they could say anything. And oftentimes they do, right? Like, you don't know what's going to come out of their mouth. Kathy Lee and Hoda, you know, if I did that,
so true.
you know, and so I feel like my nerves are calm when I know that I don't have to think about the fact that I want to share or getting it wrong because it's already in my brain. Yeah. And I might forget that particular fact half an hour later, but I've done the work to make sure that I'm doing wildlife right and representing the National Wildlife Federation well by giving out accurate information. And, you know, nowadays, giving out actual, accurate, scientifically valid, you know, information is even more important. So I take that very seriously. I think it's a responsibility for those of us that, you know, have a platform and get to go out in the media to be able to, you know, share accurate info. And you know what? I'm sure I've gotten things wrong over the course of my career doing this. It happens, well, but
yeah. I mean, and part of that though too is like, you know, a lot of times when you're doing your research on a species, whether it's a plant or an animal or an ecosystem, the data that you have available might be 4 years old. Right. You know, and that's just when the last, you know, paper was printed or whatever on that topic. And then 6 months later, there's a new study out that proves half of that wrong. It's like, well, you know, okay, I was wrong when I gave my presentation, but at the time, that was the most recent data I had available, you know. So
you know, a great example of that is I can't quote the actual studies or the exact specific time frame, but you know, for many years we always talked about constricting snakes, how they kind of suffocate their prey, and you know, in more recent years, more recent times, you know, we've learned that it's actually not really a suffocation at all. It's sort of an organ shutdown from the pressure. And so that's something
I could tell you that was a study done recently at Carnegie Mellon where they're doing pressure testing and realizing they were seizing up the heart with their constriction.
Exactly. So that's an example of a message that probably many of us, even if we're not in the media, you know, had to, you know, sort of adapt to. Same thing with like venomous lizards, you know. You know, some of the monitor lizards, you know, we never kind of thought of them that way. And then new research came out and was like, oh, yeah, they actually are. You know, not necessarily dangerous to humans, but it changes how you know, how you present, right? So, but yeah, it's, for the most part, again, I've been lucky enough to not get too nervous. But I will say there are always those little butterflies right before you go live. And again, I think that's a good thing. You know, if folks are out there watching and again, want to get involved in this kind of presenter work, it's okay to be nervous. Just channel it. You know, I feel like the times where I feel like I've screwed up have been when I've been overconfident. Where I didn't have just that little bit of an edge just to get the, you know, the adrenaline running a little bit and the focus goes in. When you go in and you're kind of cocky and, you know, overly casual, that I feel is like, at least for me, where I'm like most prone to screw it up. So
no, I agree definitely. You got to kind of channel it towards, instead of thinking about how nervous you are, thinking about how excited you are to have the opportunity to present, and that can usually shift that mindset. So we are running a bit over, but I still want to ask my last question because I always learn the most. I've done, I don't know, 15 of these so far, 14 of these so far. And this for me personally, on a completely selfish level, is the absolute gold. One question I get a lot after doing presentations, talks, whatever, is the classic, you know, I really want to help the rhinos, or I want to help the species, or I want to do something for wildlife too, but what can I do? I'm one person, you know, I've always loved animals, but I chose to go into insurance, or I'm only an 8-year-old. What can I do? So what is your answer to that? When people say to you, David, I'm only one person, what can I possibly do to make a difference for wildlife?
I think my shortest answer to that is it doesn't matter the specifics as long as you do something. So take that from there, you know, There are so many ways to get involved in conservation, so many ways. The easiest is just to support conservation organizations.
Right.
You know, the National Wildlife Federation, again, for 80 plus years, we have been supported by annual membership, you know, people just making a $10, $15, $20 donation. It helps immensely. We could not do all of the work that we do without that. So it might seem trite and it might seem like a cop. Oh, I'm just going to write a check. No, please write the check. You know, you can feel really good and confident about that. You know, get involved as an activist. Let your voice be heard. There's many ways to do that, whether that's in person or writing campaigns. Get involved taking personal actions, planting a wildlife garden. You know, this sounds like, oh, this is kind of a light, fun thing, but more and more research is being done on the actual conservation benefit of restoring native plant communities in our cities and towns and neighborhoods, and how that is impacting pollinators. You know, butterflies, bees, many of which are declining, songbirds, etc. You know, get the next generation involved. Make the commitment, if you're a parent or a caregiver of a kid, to get kids outside. Give them that gift of nature discovery, even if it's just letting them play in the woods, you know, and not be shepherded around in a little. Yeah, let them get dirty. I mean, so I could go on and on about that, but point is like, you pick what works for you. Just make the commitment to do something. And that is how we're all going to be able to really contribute and move the needle on some of this stuff. And the stark reality is that it's going to take more than professional conservationists taking these actions, and you and me, you know, saying, oh, I do this and I do that, if we're going to save species and if we're going to save habitat and ecosystems and ultimately this planet and at the ultimate us
ourselves.
You know, we're all connected, right? Yep. And so so that's what I would say. Just, it doesn't matter what, do anything. And one addendum to that too. You probably get this question as well.
Okay.
I get asked a lot of times by young adults, you know, high school kids, college students, recent grads, like, you know, what should I study? What should my career path be?
Right.
And my answer to that is, again, it doesn't necessarily matter, because my colleagues at the National Wildlife Federation are marketers and graphic designers and web developers and attorneys. You know, only a handful of us are like rooted in the natural sciences, right? So it takes all of those skill sets. You know, people who can write direct mail, people who can coordinate events, right? Yep. They're not biologists, right? They're passionate about the subject, and they want to save wildlife and they want to save the planet, and they've done their studies in a completely unrelated field, but have been able to turn their talents and that training to help. And you know, like, and I think that is just, so many times people get overwhelmed by that question and they think, oh, this is like, if I don't get this right in my sophomore year of undergrad, then my life is over, you know? Like, no.
You know, I even get high schoolers reaching out to me saying, what do I need to study in high school? Which college? I need to go to a particular college. I'm like, it doesn't matter. It's okay. It's okay. I think that's the one challenge a lot of our I sound like an old person saying this, but a lot of the youth today faces is academics seems to make them believe they have to make the choice right now. And right now for them might be a sophomore or junior in high school or freshman year in college. And like you said, I work alongside people who change major 3 times, you know, change colleges 2 or 3 times, or have a degree in something completely separate than what they're doing now. And it's just hard. I know at that age, it's hard to see the bigger picture that you and I have seen in our career, but yeah, man, it's just, if you're passionate about it and you have a skill that you in your head may not connect directly to wildlife conservation, you'd be surprised. It probably does. In some way, you're needed.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. So, yeah, I always tell people, study hard, no matter what it is that you're doing, practice, do the work, right? Build your network. That's so important. You know, it's oftentimes, and I say this neutrally, it's just as much about who you know and what that network that you've built in terms of getting your foot in the door places and whatever, as it is, you know, what you know. Both are important, and you can't neglect one. You know, you do have to, again, build that network, and you'd be surprised at how, at least from my observation, how often that is the key thing into getting, like, landing your dream job or whatever, is just reaching out to people in your field and that you want to be in, and taking it from there.
Exactly, exactly. Well, I have to jump into another meeting here in about 5 minutes. I could keep talking to you probably for another hour, though. I enjoy your company immensely, David. Thank you for taking the time today to join me on this Instagram Live. I can't thank you enough. I hope things continue to go well with nesting, and I'm sure you and I will cross paths again soon sometime.
Absolutely. I really appreciate the opportunity, Rick. So you stay safe too.
All right, take care. Have a
All
good
right.
one.
Bye.
All right, everybody. Well, that was pretty awesome. Like I could seriously, David and I could probably talk for another hour or so. It's one of those things where we have a lot of parallels in our career paths in our lives and similar passions, yet different organizations we work for and what we do. So yeah, it's kind of fun because not too many people do what we do. So it's kind of fun to talk to someone else who does that and compare notes. So this one went much longer than planned. I do have to go to another meeting. Thank you all who stuck around for the whole thing. If you're watching this afterwards over on IGTV, if you want to leave a question in the comment area, feel free. I'm sure if you tag David, he'll jump in there and answer it, or I can answer it. If you did leave a comment or something here in the scrolling through and everything, or a message, I don't have use time to get to those. And then when I do transfer to Instagram TV, those are all lost. They don't come over on the video. So if you did have something you'd like to have answered, please go ahead and comment too. I'll have this posted on IGTV probably in the next hour or two if things go well. All right, everybody. I hope you are doing well. Again, it's Tuesday. I've got another guest tomorrow, 1 o'clock. Thursday, I will not do the 1 o'clock because that's my Thursday night with Jordan at 7 o'clock. And then Friday, we'll have somebody else lined up too. So I hope to see you guys next time. And if not, well, have a good one, everybody.